So a while back, I made a few videos going over different portions of the furry drama wheel. A series of videos I should probably continue at some point, no promises though. One of those videos touched on what might be one of the most consistently recurring spaces on that wheel. Drama concerning feral porn. It seems that for every space the wheel lands on, there's always drama surrounding feral somewhere around the corner. No matter how long you're in the fandom, no matter how old you may be, I guarantee you, you will live long enough to see the question of is feral porn okay spread through the fandom on a wide scale yet again. In the video where I discussed feral drama, I gave a pretty decent overview of what it is, the mindsets behind both sides of the argument, and the multiple facets in the fandom that are affected by the question of feral being okay or not. I still think it holds up pretty well despite its age, if you don't mind the space dragon glazing. However, if you've seen that video of mine, you might notice that there's something missing from it. In all my talk about the aspects of the fandom, many have debated on the question of how far is too far when it comes to sexualizing fictional characters with animalistic features. And yet, even in a video where I went over most of the points that consisted of, I missed a pretty prominent subject in the discussion of feral versus anthro. This video, albeit a bit less organized, is to act as a sort of addendum to that subject, that being the existence of Pokemon. Obviously, I don't need to explain to you what a Pokemon is. Even if you haven't played any of the games or watched the anime, you've more than likely been exposed to it in some shape or form. It's that well known. The reason Pokemon is a pretty prominent point when talking about feral in the fandom is because it falls into the concept of monster fucking, a concept which perfectly embodies this argument down to a T. The question of how anthro is anthro enough can be asked when thinking about a good chunk of Pokemon in not safe for work scenarios. To put it simply, it feeds pretty heavily into the discussion of bipedal versus quadruped. If you said you wanted to get freaky with, say, a Gardevoir or Rillaboom, most on the internet wouldn't bat an eye, because just looking at them you think, yeah, they look human enough. This goes the same for other Pokemon as well, Lucario, Incineroar, Delphox, Lopunny. There are quite a few Pokemon who you could simp for and most wouldn't really care because, while they might find it weird, they're anthropomorphized enough to where they can kinda understand the appeal, even if it's not their thing at all. But then you throw a few quadruped Pokemon into the mix. Absol, Scolipede, Zebstrika, that one. Pokemon that, if you said you wanted to screw, would certainly get you a few side eyes, which might seem a bit odd given at base level, these are all just Pokemon regardless of posture. You'd think that getting off to Pokemon in general would get that Scarlet Zeta symbol placed on you. But as you'd expect when feral is involved, people will have more of an issue if you decide to sexualize something that looks closer to a real-life animal. And when it comes to quadruped Pokemon, there are quite a few who can be chalked up to what I'd call premium animals, like Sawsbuck basically being a souped-up deer, or Herdier, the loyal dog Pokemon. However, you also have what I'd refer to as the gray area, the Pokemon who aren't quadruped but aren't exactly all that anthro either. Pokemon that actually kind of feed into the how anthro is anthro enough question of monster fucking. Like, you could maybe make a case for Salazzle, Primarina, Reshiram, Lugia, or Beedrill, I guess?
Smash.
But the question of smash or pass is going to vary from person to person. It all comes down to whatever you're looking for, whatever you see in that Pokemon that attracts you to it for whatever reason. Let's use we'll say appreciation of werewolves, for example. Based on that, you'd probably assume I feel some type of way for the werewolf-based Pokemon Lycanroc, one that would fit into the gray area category I mentioned earlier. Well, to that I would say Obstagoon just kind of fits the bill better. Sorry. But getting back on track, I explain all this to paint a picture of how Pokemon are discussed in terms of feral drama among furries. Most of it comes down to the same conclusion it always does though. People will associate with like-minded people and refuse to interact with those who go against their own principles. I might be a bit late in stating this, but I myself am pretty adamantly against feral porn. But even though I'm against it, I won't immediately label those who engage with it as verified zoophiles. I understand why most would, though. Believe me, I'm aware. Call it wishful thinking of mine, but I feel I'm less likely to think someone wants to fuck their dog when they're getting off to fatalis or something equally as exaggerative. But while I'm not one to immediately label those who indulge in feral porn as zoophiles, I feel that like lolicon and CP, feral porn and bestiality as concepts have enough overlap between the two of them for me to put those who partake in it into the same boat morally, regardless of the former just being pixels on screen. But for some, the fact of Pokemon being fictional creatures is enough to see feral porn of them as alright. The difference in position is why this drama occurs so frequently, as most people will label you a zoophile should you want to fuck a scolipede, much like others will label you a Puritan should you find issue in being aroused by a scolipede's chocolate donut. And speaking of Pokemon assholes, you're probably wondering what sparked me to talk about something like this. Well, like the majority of drama that occurs on furry Twitter, it all started when a tweet left its intended audience. Toothpick, user handle toothpickisgay, is a relatively popular furry in the fandom, primarily known for their takes on furry and LGBT discourse, as well as the somewhat obscene tweets they would make. Notable examples being, "Fucking pisses me off when AI furry shit gives me a fool's boner. A Lucario bouncing on it would genuinely fix me. Extremely excited to announce that at the airport, a sex toy fell out of my bag in front of a family of 4. Someone fed me curly fries while I got fucked in the ass. I love furry cons. I guess time really is a flat circle." Tweets like this are a pretty sizable portion of their Twitter history, one of the more recent tweets becoming the unlucky catalyst for this iteration of feral drama, making the following tweet that read, "Y'all think Arcanine's asshole tastes like hot takis?" This tweet would reignite the feral discourse cycle when a Twitter user known as DeathWolfSimp would repost the tweet with the caption, "Pop you first, stop being weird, challenge. Babe, that is a dog." Now, you could just chalk this off as an unfunny joke leaving its intended audience. However, this is Twitter we're talking about. Of course, this can't be a crappy joke someone made. This person must want to fuck a dog. And as any conflict on the internet goes, not only would you have those adamantly claiming Toothpick was into feral and therefore a zoophile, but you'd also have the other side of the aisle who claims Toothpick was into feral and that it was okay. The thing is, as I researched this drama, I hadn't seen anything that I would feel justifies the theory of Toothpick being a zoo or even into feral. Supporting feral content is a possibility, but that's going off of their supposed indifference to the stuff, which I don't really like using indifference as solid proof of someone's support. Regardless, there doesn't seem to be anything I've seen that points to their own indulgence in this stuff. And yet, we would see this crappy joke start a war about whether getting off to a quadruped Pokemon made you a zoophile or not. I'll sort the fallout of this drama into 3 sections, starting with Toothpick's response to it all. It can be assumed sometime after the drama started, Toothpick would delete the tweets, presumably due to the shitstorm gathering around it. Following that, they pretty much only acknowledged it in the replies of friends giving their takes on the situation. As besides that, there were only about 3 tweets they'd make acknowledging it after the presumed deletion. Those being, "Damn bro, you make an arcanine butthole joke and everyone wants to kill you. I wasn't even horny, I was just asking questions. My brothers, it just ain't that serious, LMFAO. It is free to watch the clouds and sit there listening to the wind. I suggest you do that as soon as possible and save what little of your soul is left." All in all, the response essentially amounts to what you'd expect of the average person, questioning why people chose to take their jokes so seriously. I'm sure based on what we're talking about in this video, you can piece together what brought up this discussion just by looking at the tweets and seeing that Toothpick used an image of an arcanine from the anime, a depiction of the Pokemon that is quite noticeably just a giant orange fire dog. So with that in mind, you can kinda understand why people came to the conclusion. The issue there is that you'd have to actually put that logic together yourself and assume that Toothpick is attracted to dog ass specifically. There's nothing here that really points towards Toothpick being into feral other than them using this specific image of Arcanine. an assumption that kinda falls apart if they had used a picture of an anthro arcanine instead. If they just used a different image, this whole discourse could have been prevented. This factor alone is why this drama's origin is such a baffling one to me. Regardless, this assumption would spark the feral porn discourse yet again. Furries from both sides arguing against one another with the assumption that Toothpick was into feral porn, using that assumption to strengthen their arguments either for or against the material. Now, as I stated already, when I saw this tweet, I believed it to be a joke, as this Twitter user is known for making tweets in this fashion. One of the tweets I read previously even landing in the same ballpark. It's certainly not my kind of humor, but a joke, good or bad, doesn't have to abide by my standards to still be a joke at its core. But as users on furry Twitter caught wind of this tweet, those outside of their follower base saw it as Toothpick condoning feral smut, which would draw out both support and disdain from Twitter users. Nas Hyena being one of the more vocal poppy furs to say something on the matter, simply tweeting out, "I would gladly eat out an arcanine, especially if they tasted like takis." Me when Hall Monitor asks teenage furries start insincere moral crusades about shit that literally hurts no one. I have never ever said anything as a joke on this site ever. Take everything I say completely seriously and literally. Once you get laid regularly, you'll definitely care what strangers like me on the internet say. Y'all are getting non-excessive amounts of screen time. Obnoxious sarcasm aside, ironic coming from me, I know. These posts were essentially the sentiments from those who vocalized their support Toothpick's way, either acknowledging it to be a joke, saying that there's nothing wrong with feral porn, or saying that to have a problem with feral porn, you have to be either a Puritan who hasn't been laid, or simply terminally online. It's actually kind of impressive how he managed to give the entire spectrum of responses a reach around. I would assume I don't need to explain the issue with this logic, but you know how the internet can be. For some reason, some furries in the fandom find no issue with this logic, despite it essentially being a repurposing of arguments in favor of lolicon porn. The same excuses of it's not real, it's actually a 1,000-year-old god, you're a minor who knows nothing about the world, you know the ones. I will certainly admit that feral smut drama is an inherently online drama, as usually the concept of screwing Pokemon is no longer a thing the moment you turn off your screen. But that fact usually doesn't wash away the crappy aftertaste those excuses usually leave, like a tweet that would be made by another popular furry by the name of Pawbutt, now known as Cross-Smut. Following the tweet previously made by DeathSimp, they would post that tweet along with another where they were simping for Fletcher Kane, a furry character from Fortnite. The attached reply read, "The cartoony fire Pokemon should be treated as an animal, but the Wolfman with a realistic wolf head is a musky husky uwu cutie." The point they're making here is that it's hypocritical to condemn people who are into this fictional character, and then go on to simp for another fictional character, when the difference between these two characters couldn't be more obvious. Like, I understand what they're getting at. People who hate furries will probably call you a zoophile for having the hots for either of these two, but that doesn't really take away the main issue people had, the arcanine being a quadrupedal, dog-looking Pokemon. It leaves people wondering what you find arousing about that specific character, something that gets difficult to explain when said character is on all fours and communicates in barks, opposed to two legs speaking human language. This is only driven further by the fact that, again, this drama certainly wouldn't have blown up the way it did had Toothpick used an image of an anthro arcanine rather than a still from the anime. I mean, some might be skeptical of that given the current state of Twitter, but I'd be willing to take that gamble. Wishful thinking aside though, you had people accusing Toothpick of being a zoophile just based on the image they used. All the while, other people seeing this display would feel the need to defend feral porn with the same eyebrow-raising logic used by lolicon fanatics. All for a situation that, in the long run, would end in the same conclusion feral porn drama always does, with people coming to the realization that if you're against feral for whatever reason, you can just block and refuse to interact with those who support it. Believe me, I certainly understand the desire to eradicate any and all traces of zoophile from our fandom's reputation, but sooner or later you realize that goal is, unfortunately, practically unattainable. It's a lot like that one 4chan meme about fucking toasters. There's communities out there for just about anything. even the things that most would deem immoral, heinous, or a blight on humanity. Combine that with the fact of just how many people in the world partake in the furry fandom, and you start to understand why attempting to gatekeep the furry fandom as a whole is nothing more than a pipe dream. The best you can manage is keeping tabs on your own little microcosm within it. Find the people you actually gel with while breaking off those you don't. Something that couldn't be easier to do nowadays, given not only how centralized the internet has become, for better or worse, but the mute and block tools we have at our disposal to cut out what we don't want to see, when their functionality isn't deliberately crippled, at least. For the third section, you probably have a question on your mind. If Toothpick never indulged in the drama as it unfolded, how did it come to an end? Who was the main character of the whole thing? I mean, a drama needs a central figure to continue burning. It doesn't work if the OP doesn't budge, right? Well, that main character would end up being the author of the post I mentioned before, Crossmut. Much like Toothpick, Crossmut is a popular furry known for their discussion of furry and queer discourse, as well as their involvement in the musician-centric side of the fandom. The vitriol that people had towards Toothpick for the joke they made was mostly redirected towards Cross, as they made a number of posts that weren't all too kosher. I certainly wouldn't call them a zoophile, but I can't say I agree with their posts in this situation either. Their inclusion in this drama would actually start from a quote retweet they made of Toothpick's post, one I think I'll refrain from reading aloud. This would lead into the post we saw before, comparing Arcanine to Fletcher Kane, the comparison only resulting in further frustrations being directed towards Cross. This would get a pretty sizable amount of flack sent Cross's way. Some of it was reasonable enough. I mean, I certainly disagree with the tweet personally. However, just like Toothpick, I can't say it undeniably proves them being a zoophile either, as outside of piling on to a bad tweet, there doesn't appear to be anything pointing to them justifying it outright, fictional or otherwise. But you'd still have those who'd latch on to the drama, going on about how your favorite poppy furs actually commission nasty feral porn on the regular, something that can surely be the case. But the fact it happens doesn't suddenly justify the existence of the stuff, at least not to myself. Regardless of those using Cross's take to further justify or condemn feral porn, Cross would put out a statement saying how they aren't into feral and don't condone realistic depictions of animals. They continue saying, "I wanted to make a joke about Pokemon, and in one tweet I pointed out how the line drawn between a fictional Pokemon and, say, a Wolf Fortnite character was interesting. Because in the end, none of the depictions are realistic, and something like Arcanine or another Pokemon seemed more removed from reality. It's valid to say you think it was weird or unfunny, or you don't agree with my observation, but I've seen several people I've never interacted with claim I like feral as if it's factual. Reception to this was about what you'd expect. As I said before, as much as I disagree with their take, I can't with a good conscience label them as something they don't appear to be. And that kind of brings me to the main issue I have with this specific drama as a whole. If it wasn't made clear, I find this whole drama to be pretty idiotic all around. Maybe it's just me being someone who covered their share of zoophiles, but seeing the whole process of Toothpick and Crossmut being labeled as zoophiles off of nothing more than the fallout of their shitty Pokemon jokes kind of rubbed me the wrong way. However, the fallout did end up justifying my own stance to condemn anything relating to feral porn. I've said it countless times before, but I personally condemn feral porn as a whole due to the similarities it can possess with real-life bestiality. I'm fully aware they aren't a one-to-one exact same thing, and I'm also aware that the random dude on Twitter who wants to get dicked down by Giratina most likely isn't making googly eyes at the family dog. But just the general similarity in those concepts is enough for me to see both feral porn and bestiality as being cut from the same cloth, resulting in me condemning both entirely. I explain all this to say that this is why feral drama comes up as often as it does in the fandom. It's not due to the fact that this drama is a terminally online one, which, sure, it is. But it's due to the fact that if furries even so much as make a post that's vaguely in support of feral, you'll see a multitude of zoophiles ready to latch onto that. And unfortunately, in this age of the internet, Twitter specifically, if you make an argument that group can use, obviously you have to be one of them, right? That isn't to say that this overreaction to the joke was baseless, however, because like myself, a majority of furries see feral porn as a broken gate actual zoophiles can slip into the fandom through. It's because zoophiles see feral porn as the great equalizer between them and furry, because obviously you can't tell a zoophile they don't belong here if you're beating your meat to feral frenzy. That'd just be hypocritical. So while their response to the drama that ensued lent an unintentional credence to those actually condoning feral, I don't see Toothpick or Cross as people fighting to condone it or anything of the sort. Just two people whose joke got taken as endorsement of what most would call a blemish on the community. As I said before, the fandom is much too big to gatekeep at this point. You're better off just making sure your own personal circle is in order. All that one can really do to show they don't support feral porn is to make their sentiment known and show those in favor of it to the door. I mean, it's been working pretty alright for me so far. So that being said, yeah, I guess that's about it. Like, subscribe, all that usual YouTube crap, and I'll see you all in the next video. Hopefully one with a little bit more structure. Stay safe out there.
That is a dog. What do you think I am, some kind of white woman? I would never...
Funding for this program was made possible by...